I think everybody's a little bit trying to handicap what's going to happen here and what it's ultimately going to mean for policy. Where do you land right now?
Our view is that it's very likely Republicans will take control of the House. We're expecting something like 20 or 25 seats, which would give them around a 20-vote margin. And we'd also expect Republicans to take the Senate as well. I think the betting markets, professional forecasters, et cetera, have all shifted in that direction. We'd expect somewhere in 51 to 53 Republican seats in the Senate.
So if you're right, sort of walk through what you think the next 2 years look like in terms of policy. What kind of policy changes or maybe just policy that doesn't happens?
Yeah, I think it's mostly upside for markets, and a lot of it, I think, has to do with very little policy getting done. I think immediately, whether you have Republican control of the House, but also with the Senate as well, it changes some of the dynamics. But as long as Republicans have control of the House, at least, it takes all new tax increases off the table. The prospects of any sort of pro-inflation budget-busting bill are gone. I think some of Biden's threats become toothless in the case of windfall profits tax and the like. That just wouldn't happen. I think on the upside, you see greater defense spending, higher odds that expiring corporate tax provisions, about $50 billion of which are biting this year, another $70 billion in tax increases next year. There's better odds of resolving some of those. I think it takes risk off the tech sector from any kind of antitrust legislation. And one, I think, underappreciated benefit for the markets, I think, as you'll recall, back in when Senator Warren had a boomlet in the Democratic primaries, if healthcare stocks sold off. I think if Republicans were to take the Senate with, say, 52 seats, the math is super favorable to Republicans in 2024. The states you could consider toss-ups, for example, would be Texas and Florida that Republicans are defending. So I think if Republicans win the Senate now, you're going to put a lot of certainty into the market through 2026 when you at least have divided control of government. Even if Democrats win the White House in 2024, they're very unlikely to have the Senate.
Can we go back? I want to just go back to two things you said one about taxes, the other about antitrust and regulation. The first on the tax piece, you made the comment that you thought, like, Biden's windfall tax comments would be toothless. Do you think they're not toothless now? I mean, do you actually think that some of these, do you think there'd be additional taxes over the next 2 years if Democrats were in power?
I think if Democrats were somehow able to win the House and the Senate, I think in that case, if Democrats are winning the House, they're not just Sinema and Manchin are no longer the marginal votes in the Senate. I think they would be picking up seats there as well. And I think then Biden's agenda, what was left of it, would be right back on the table with, Democrats were unable to pass child care expansions, paid leave, expanding the child tax credit. There would be a host of kind of social spending priorities that would be financed by all of the tax increases that were behind, taxes on multinationals and wealthy individuals. So that would be back on the table.
You then also made the comment about antitrust policy. First of all, the possible breakup of companies or things that could happen to companies in the immediate term over the next 2 years, I would argue would be a function of the Department of Justice, and that's irrelevant or irrespective, frankly, of who's in power. But the question is whether you think that there'd be actual antitrust policy that would get passed during the next 2 years that would change that policy. And that doesn't seem to really be on the table and hasn't been, obviously, even despite all the talking about it over the last 2 years.
Yeah, there's actually one piece of legislation that was supposed to come to a vote in the Senate that Republicans agreed to. Would sort of end self-preferencing, which is a pillar of tech profitability, or so-called. You saw Chuck Grassley sponsored legislation with Amy Klobuchar, and you saw that get passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee 16-6, and a lot of Republicans supporting it. I think it would be still hard to do, even in Democratic-controlled Congress, but it's much easier to, say, get 50 Democratic votes for curbing tech's market power and pick up 10 Republicans, as opposed to, say, get 50 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So I think the odds of that would then be kind of killed.